Thank you, Carl. Welcome to presentation Navigating Funds for Conservation in the 21st Century. Carl's going to lead us through this presentation today. It's being recorded. Anyone that comes in late, you can view the recordings. We'll send out the links afterwards. And if there's any questions, please type them in the chat and someone will be helping with technical assistance. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carl.
Thanks, Gladys. And hello, Nigel and Robin and Liliana and Edwin and Cecilia and everyone who's there in Washington. Glad you could all make it, and congratulations everyone for, I think, almost getting through the whole kinship program. Hey, how long have you all got left? Like a week?
Oh no. Oh no, what did I do?
He's still there.
He's still there.
Yeah.
You guys still hear me?
Sorry, 20 seconds to get it on.
Oh, we had technical difficulties. Did you? So we didn't hear a word we said at all. So please start again. Sorry about that.
No worries. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
So I'll preface that with I thought that I was presenting yesterday Australian time, and I'm so glad I wasn't, because we have this nation building project in Australia where we've built the national broadband network, and it's the biggest disaster our country has ever had. And our internet where we live, because we're on a farm, is absolutely terrible. And they did another outage yesterday, and when we rang them up, they said, oh, it's for 6 days. So yesterday I took the day off work and I searched everywhere for a satellite internet, and I hooked it up on my roof yesterday, drilled it into the roof, and it's amazing. So hopefully we'll have no connectivity issues from my end. But very, very glad that we got it sorted and I wasn't presenting yesterday, because it would have been a mess. So I'm hoping that this line is very, very clear. And thanks everyone for coming along and for being a part of this presentation on the Kinship Day, the first one ever, I think, right? That's pretty exciting. And congratulations to all of you fellows as well for almost graduating Kinship, I think. How long's left of the program?
Yeah, Nigel says we can't count the graduation early, but yes, they're almost at the end.
You've got to pass the final test.
In the mountains.
Well, I hope you've all had a great time in Bellingham. I've seen a few photos on the WhatsApps, and yeah, it was such a good program, and I love that part of the world, and hope you're all really enjoying it. Thanks for being a part of this, everyone online too. So my name is Karl Goodsell. I'm a 2019 fellow from Queensland in Australia, and I run a non-for-profit called Positive Change for Marine Life. And today I'd like to talk through the biggest challenge that I've faced and our organization has faced, and I'm sure many of you have faced as well, no matter which sector you work in, which is navigating funding for conservation in the 21st century. And I'd like to speak to lessons learned personally from building a not-for-profit from scratch, which is something that I never thought I would do and kind of came about by chance. And I'll speak a little bit more about that during this presentation. So a little bit about me. I've always had an affinity with nature and felt really connected to natural places. I think a lot of that started with my Oma. She was a refugee after World War II from Austria. Her family went through the war, and she came over here from a refugee camp in Italy in just after the war in the late 1940s, and had a real affinity to the big open spaces in Australia, the huge old gum trees and our forests, and I guess the endless space that we're lucky enough to have, because we're on such a big continent with a relatively small population. I always tell people that my Oma was the first tree hugger I ever knew, although she didn't really fit the mold. She was a conservative older Austrian lady who wore pearls, but we'd go to forests and literally she would hug trees and close her eyes and really connect to them. So I think she was a big inspiration for me growing up, and we used to hike and camp a lot. I also grew up in a very conservative area on the outskirts of Sydney, where environmental work was very taboo. You know, being called a greenie was a derogatory term. Probably is where we live now too, sadly, in the country. But the sadness for me, and something that really hit me growing up, was all of the places that I loved, that I explored, that I had cubby houses in as a kid, that I'd go to with my family. I remember one place called Spain Reserve, and at night we'd drive there if we went out for dinner, put all the windows down, turn the lights off and the engine off on the car, and listen to the frogs and the owls and all the wilderness. And all of those places as I grew up were demolished and replaced with housing developments and car parks and the typical suburban sprawl that I guess we see all over the world. And that was really heartbreaking, and something that hit me quite hard, especially with that love for those places that was instilled in me from a young age. So I started working with not-for-profits in 2004 when I was traveling in Southeast Asia, not by choice. It kind of, again, was by chance. A friend who lived in the same apartment complex as I did in Chiang Mai in Thailand. She was from the US, and she was working for a non-profit that was working to bring refugees across the border from Myanmar and smuggle them into Thailand because they were facing political oppression. And I started working with that organization and fell in love with nonprofit work almost instantly, and I've been working for nonprofits since then. I actually used to play professional soccer, and my goal was to play in the English Premier League, but I injured my knee when I was 20 and started to study different degrees. I did physiotherapy, design, graphic design, film, and just floated around. So I was kind of traveling, working for nonprofits, studying different bachelor's degrees, never finishing them. And I remember my dad saying to me when I started marine science in 2009, after 4 failed degrees, that it was another one I was just going to fail, and I may as well give up now. Thanks, Dad, for the encouragement. But the reason I mention this is because I only have a bachelor's degree, and I say only, but you know, in our sector, in conservation science particularly, I feel like there's a lot of judgment on higher education and master's degrees and PhDs. And I'd like to hope that my story is something that inspires people, that degrees aren't the only way to go. And I really encourage a lot of our interns and volunteers get on ground experience and get that exposure. And you know, degrees aren't always everything. So in 2012, I founded Positive Change for Marine Life while I was studying my marine science degree. We've grown from I think $150 that a friend and I chipped in the beginning, and that's all we had in our bank account in 2011, to now being a multinational not-for-profit that's worked across 7 countries, and we employ about 140 people in total across those 3 areas. So exciting to see that growth, but it's also been a huge journey, and one that's been fraught with many, many challenges, and a lot of times that I was really ready to throw in the towel. So back to the origins of where we started, and I'm not sure if many people, even at Kinship, who I've become close with and are in my networks, know about the background to Positive Change for Marine Life. But I was actually working for quite a hardcore activist organization back in my uni days. And I don't know if any of you have seen the Cove documentary about the dolphin hunting in Japan, which won an Academy Award back in 2009 or 2010. I believe. But I was sent over to Japan to lead the campaign for dolphin hunting by the organization I was working for in Australia at the time. I'm very thankful that I took my time to understand the on-ground situation before I jumped in, and I was actually really shocked at the abusive and belittling, bullying behavior that foreign activists were portraying towards local people in what was a legal industry with a rich history that was steeped in tradition. And what I saw in my time in Taiji was that this aggression from foreigners was actually creating a never say die attitude in the local community and within the local dolphin hunting industry as well. And I guess I was very naive back then. Probably I'm still a little bit naive, um, but I was just trying to wrap my head around how the activists were thinking that that was going to create change, when it was very clear that it was only extending the industry and the people's resilience to not giving in. I think that if local people perceive something as cultural, it's hard to fathom foreigners who don't speak their language or understand their communities telling them that it isn't, especially when there seemed to be so much self-righteousness in this group of people there. And I often tell people I was equally shocked by experiencing dolphin hunting. I'd done some dolphin research prior to that, and you know, surfed with dolphins in Australia and seeing that it's not something that's very pleasant, but equally shocked by the behavior of those activists who were there on the ground. So I left that organization, and they cancelled my flight home, which was probably the best thing that ever happened, because eventually that led to the formation of Positive Change for Marine Life. As a broke university student at the time, can you guys still hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I decided to stay with a friend, who's the red gloves in the top right picture, Beck, who was the co-founder of Positive Change for Marine Life. And we started a Facebook page to raise awareness on an alternative approach, which was focused on understanding, education, and respect, and looking at ways that we could develop alternative models that celebrated and integrated culture and local community perspectives, but also protected marine life and looked after biodiversity. We led a successful action for dolphins back then, which you can see in the top right photo, and brought a few Japanese people from around the country over, which was something that back then, and probably still now, was quite big. It's very risky for local Japanese people to get involved and stand up against industries like these, and not just from a government and legal perspective, but also from a family and peer group perspective as well. There's a lot of shame associated to these sorts of activities. So for us to bring, I think we had about 15 all Japanese women from various parts of the country across was quite a big thing. And that event was called the Day of Action for Dolphins. And it actually, surprisingly to me, again, probably a little naive, brought in Japanese naval vessels from Tokyo that was sitting right outside the cove, as well as a horde of police and media. So when we rocked up with the 10 or 15 or so Japanese women to military ships, media and police everywhere, we were pretty taken aback. That event was replicated in 23 other countries as well, and it still goes on today, although I'm not these days not particularly fond of its approach or messaging. I'd say I probably don't agree with it so much, even though we founded it back then in 2011. From those humble beginnings in Japan and from the Facebook page Positive Change in Taiji, we ended up raising quite a bit of money, which kept us in Japan, and we ended up running this program with the local communities over the next 3 or 4 years, and eventually in 2012 was one of the first programs for Positive Change for Marine Life. While I was in Japan in my second year in 2012, I was hired as a consultant for the Environmental Investigation Agency in the UK, to explore post-Fukushima tsunami porpoise hunting industry in northern Japan, and the resumption of it, which was really fascinating, but also I'd say the first paid gig for what was to become Positive Change for Marine Life. And subsequently, we were also contracted by Pangea Seed, a then Japanese-based organization that now operates out of Hawaii, to look at shark fisheries in northern Japan as well. So in 2012, when we returned to Australia after spending a number of months in Japan and getting to know a lot of the local dolphin hunters and the people involved in the captive trade industry as well, and starting to tell that different story and looking at that different approach of how we could focus on programs that were based on understanding, education, and respect. We, a friend, Beck and myself and a few other friends were having some beers one night, and we had a conversation, and said, well, why don't we start an NGO? We have no idea what we're doing, but we've all got a little bit of experience volunteering and working for various NGOs. Why don't we just give it a shot? We've raised money through the Facebook page. It's growing. We've got quite a large following there. And so we started to develop this idea of an organization that we all came up with the name quite quickly of Positive Change for Marine Life, because it really spoke to what we were doing. There was no guesswork involved. And one of my friends drew a little stick figure whale with a stick man underneath it, which ended up turning into the logo that you see now. We wanted something simple that was replicable, that people could draw, and had a really strong brand identity. And I think we've done that through our logo really well. And a lot of people always comment on how effective the logo is and how much they love it. And that's really what we were looking for. So it all came together relatively quickly. And we, over the years, were looking at how we could have a community-driven approach to conservation and social challenges. We really realized that in Taiji, in northern Japan, even in Australia, I'd done some volunteer work in remote indigenous communities. Conservation and social challenges are really interlinked. So how could we develop programs that were underpinned by social change and livelihoods, but had conservation outcomes? And what we call it is a conservation instead of an exploitation approach, which we're still using that terminology today. To date now, we've run 34 campaigns across 7 countries, and we currently operate full-time with centres and full-time on-ground teams in 3 marine biodiversity hotspots: the southwest coast of India in Kerala, the western province of the Solomon Islands, and in northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland in Australia. We have 3 main focus areas, which is marine pollution, blue and green forest rewilding, and community-led fisheries, which also look at how we can develop locally managed marine areas and MPAs. And that's our newest program that we just launched last year. And they're all underpinned by livelihoods, especially focusing on gender equality and social inclusion and climate resilience. They're the 2 key themes that underpin all of our work. So I'd like to play a short video now, which we just released with our new website a few months ago. And I think it gives a good overview, very short overview of our global programs and our teams and the work that we do. So hopefully the sound works for you. Let me know if there's any challenges.
From Australia
to India,
to the Solomon Islands and beyond.
We are Positive Change for Marine Life.
Embracing a people-focused approach to ocean regeneration, we empower communities to become stewards of their oceans. Addressing issues like waste, rewilding blue forests, and reimagining fisheries, we recognise that lasting change is best led by those who know the ocean, who live it, breathe it, and depend on it. Our Waste to Wealth initiative tackles solid and organic waste at its source, addressing plastic pollution through the Leave No Trace project. We empower marginalised communities to manage tens of thousands of tonnes of waste per year through the weekly waste collection service, while utilising black soldier fly larvae to transform organic waste into profitable, sustainable compost, combating a key source of pollution and human disease. Innovative and community-led Waste to Wealth fosters ocean-friendly economies, creating unique products and long-term livelihoods through a truly closed-loop approach. Rewilding our floodplains unites farmers, fishers, tourism operators, scientists, and the public to appreciate the value of blue forests in coastal floodplains. We develop multifaceted solutions to rewild these lungs of the planet for wildlife, water, land, community, and climate resilience. Fishing for Change returns the power to protect marine life to those dependent on it for survival, inspiring fishing communities into action to sustainably manage their resource while allowing nature to thrive. Our global programs encompass waste reduction, rewilding blue forests, and fostering a collective voice for sustainable fisheries. Join us as we inspire global communities to drive positive change for marine life.
One ocean, one people,
One planet.
So that's a little promo film that we put together earlier this year as part of our new website launch, and something that we've envisaged for probably 6 years. So really nice to finally pull it all together, and we use that as the main point to introduce people to our programs and the work that we do globally. So I'd like to talk about the challenges now, which is really a key part of this presentation, and again, something that we're probably still keeping me up at night, even as we've grown significantly, is the challenges around resourcing. And I know a lot of you are no doubt in a similar situation, and I'd like to talk a little bit about those challenges from my perspective and what we faced prior to Kinship, especially, which was really a catalyst for change for me and the organization moving forward, which I'll speak to shortly. So lack of funding is the big one, and still is today. As we grow, we have to resource our larger teams, and it's always a challenge to do that, especially to maintain that growth and to continue that growth moving forward as we're trying to develop and address more and more issues. We were too heavily reliant on volunteers. At one stage, I think we had about 3,500 volunteers a year. I was working as a volunteer myself for the first 6 years of the organization, from I think 2011 until 2017. I was a volunteer, and I was also working full-time for some large international and Australian-based conservation NGOs as a campaigner. So working full-time as a campaigner and running positive change on the side was really burning me out. And we had so many volunteers that I was managing that was also taking a lot of my time, and we had a big turnover rate, which was also challenging because it meant that we had to retrain those volunteers and constantly manage them. And 90% of my volunteer time was spent training and managing other volunteers. We had far too many small and underfunded programs. I think by 2013, 2014, we had 6 or 7 programs with barely any funding, like running them off 4 or 5 grand a year, largely relying on in-kind and volunteers. And again, it was just too much. We couldn't manage it and really achieve the outcomes that we were hoping to. We had a lack of staff capacity to support programs, no paid staff, very, very challenging. It really speaks for itself. An outdated strategic direction that wasn't being implemented, again, because of a lack of capacity. So our strategic direction just wasn't updated, and as a result was redundant largely. And I was overwhelmed and burning out and just not sleeping, trying to build this monster organization without any of the basis or the resources or the strategic direction or the planning that we really needed to be successful. So some of the challenges in more detail. Again, I've mentioned this. I think I was incredibly naive when I started as to what we could achieve and how we could do it. I still am. I still think we can save the world and do everything, and that it's all just going to magically come together. And often it does, but not to the extent that I would like it to. At this point in time, I'd like us to be bringing in $100 million a year, but it's not happening. Maybe one day. I don't know. We'll see. But it's also good to be optimistic. But I think I've learned over the years to be realistic as well, which, my wife balances out. She's a lot more grounded than I am. But I think it's good to have that healthy optimism coupled with healthy dose of realism as well. I'm sure it's more common than I might recognize, but we really just made it up as we went along. And that, as you can imagine, was fraught with challenges. And I really didn't appreciate the complexity and amount of work that was needed to raise funds, raise our profile, build a brand, and achieve successful outcomes in the early days. So the first, up until 2019, till Kinship, I'd say the first, 8-9 years was tough. In an incredibly competitive world and an even more competitive sector of environmental and conservation funding, the frustration has often been the catch-22 that funders want low risk and high return, and that coupled with the realities of small NGOs their impact, which is often, I would say, much higher comparatively to the larger NGOs, and the many hurdles that small NGOs face, especially when it comes to competing with those major brands that have a huge amount of resources, is incredibly challenging. And I've always asked, how can we aspire to create change without a proven track record? How can you build that trust without the resources when no one's willing to take the first step to invest in you to actually build that vision? And even today, we find that really challenging as larger funders want so much history to proceed with applications, but then they're telling you, oh, we want new programs and we want innovation and we want, we want to support growth. But in reality, that often doesn't line up. So that's been a huge challenge for us and still is today, even with the track record, when we're competing with those larger organizations. Thinking that we can do everything and staying focused on one issue or one project can also be an enormous challenge. At first, we ended up having 6 campaigns, as I mentioned, with little to no resources, and it was challenging to not say yes to everything and everyone, and we were just dragged in all sorts of directions. And today, I think I have 45,000 unread emails, which might give people panic attacks and would have given me a panic attack 10 years ago, but I've just had to let it go, and just not respond to the people that aren't contributing or aren't adding that dollar or resource value to what we're trying to achieve, because we just simply don't have the capacity. So it really takes a lot of focus on what has the biggest return on investment, and your time is an investment. And I've really had to learn that the hard way over the years as well. My advice would be start small, no matter what you're doing, whether it's a project or starting an NGO or a business, social enterprise. Start small with a tangible goal and build from there. I'm sure most of you already know this, but ensuring that you do that and that you use SMART goals or objectives or a similar approach to ensure that what you're doing is realistic is advice that I would have really benefited from when I started Positive Change 12 years or so ago. Scope creep is really hard to overcome in our sector and really important to be aware of as well. And hopefully the next slide shines some light on solutions to some of these challenges. So in the early days, we had no proper understanding of planning and how policy, systems and processes are really key to growth. Again, solutions and in hindsight, I'd say develop your focus and strategy first. Design your programs around what funders are looking for and where there's need. That doesn't mean redesign your programs for funders. And again, that's something that we've really had to focus on over the years, is not going for funds where we have to change our strategic direction or we need to change our program outcomes, because it doesn't serve us and it actually just further reduces our capacity and time. And we've had some grants over the years that have been more harm to the organization than they were good, because we've designed them for funders rather than looking for funding that suits our model. So whilst I say design your programs around what funders are looking for and where there's need, also make sure that you're doing that from the get-go when you're designing the plan, to make sure that there are funds that fit what you're trying to achieve. But once you have that strategic plan in motion, you have your communities on board, you have your outcomes, I would suggest steering clear of shifting that direction for funders, because again, it's just going to reduce your capacity. The third part of this is there really need for your work and approach? And this is something that we've had to think long and hard on over the years, as well as creating a new entity or NGO or project can be an incredibly hard slog and also can be fraught with challenges. And I think there's a real benefit to aligning with existing initiatives if you're not fulfilling a niche and you're not adding value. And that can be something that's hard to come to terms with and own, but definitely worth thinking about in the early days of any program. developer support network. And again, this was a really difficult one for me. It took me so long to develop a proper support network, especially I think as the CEO and the founder of the organization. Too close to the work. I'm still too close to the work, and I recognize that. I get quite sensitive about things, and my pet peeve is founders and other CEOs that are complete micromanagers and dominate and don't let anyone else lead. I hope I'm not like that, but I also see that I can be, you know, a little bit too close to the organization and take things still to this day sometimes personally when you need to have that that distance from the work that you do. So I'm working on that and trying to get better at it. But Kinship assisted me immensely in that regard, because being the CEO and founder, it's really challenging to have friendships within the organization. You've got to maintain those professional barriers. And I found in the early days, those barriers didn't exist. And I thought that was okay. It was like, you know, we can all be friends, we'll all get on really well. But what you realize is without those barriers, things just don't work as well as they should. And I've had to really set those boundaries. Again, something that was really quite challenging for me because I'm quite a open book, and I've found it really hard to set those personal professional boundaries in the past. But a lot of people say, you know, it's lonely at the top, and it is, because it's hard to bounce ideas off people. It's hard to vent frustrations. You can't do that with your staff. You don't want to lose their respect. You need to be the rock. And so developing that network has taken a long time, and I'm really happy to say that now in 2024 we have a great board, we have a great management team. We've got an advisory board that we're developing now, and along with Kinship and all of the great networks that I've built through Kinship, some of which have been on our board over the years, we present with, we're developing project proposals together between organizations. I feel a lot better in that regard in terms of having that professional support that we need to, or that I need personally to navigate all of this work. And I think developing that from the get-go and having those key allies that can provide networks, insights, and confidence is really vital, and something that all of you, no matter where you are in your career, should hopefully have. And if you don't, look to building, and I hope that Kinship can provide some of that as well through this program for the cohort this year. The third step to success from my perspective is design for funding and don't be afraid to ask for funds. Speak confidently to your vision, believe in the work that you do. I've had an enormous fear of asking for funding because I always internally told myself that we weren't ready. I wanted everything to be perfect before we reached out for funding. And that unreadiness was 5 years of not even applying for a grant. Like, we literally did not apply for any funds until 5 or 6 years in, even though we were all volunteer based. We had limited resources because I was so afraid to ask. And we ended up bringing in funds just by people who knew about our work, and that was the small amount of funding that kept us going. So again, hindsight's 2020, but if I looked back now, I would be out there developing the planning and the systems we need, developing that support network, and then making sure we have the funds before we even start the on-ground work, through that strong vision and strategic approach. The fear of asking for funds hasn't entirely gone away, but I'm much better at it. I'd say 80% of my role now is really fundraising and networking to ensure that we have the resources to keep moving forward. And this is just as an aside, a picture that I came across the other day, back in 2011, of our first stall at a big festival. And you can see how grassroots we were. I'm pretty sure we cut that hole in the top of the donation tin. We stuck stickers all over it. We printed a lot of our own flags. It was a pretty dodgy setup, and interesting to look back on. And then in 2017, this was our stall. We started doing big music events all around the country, and our brand recognition was definitely growing, and we did quite well from these events. But again, the work that we put in versus the reward that we got out really wasn't worth it. And we've again shifted away from this model of being out there all the time, being in the community, and instead realizing that our time and resources are much better spent pursuing those much bigger opportunities that are going to enable us to achieve our long-term objectives. So I want to talk about how Kinship helped to drive positive change for me and subsequently for the organization as well. In 2019, I was literally at the end of my tether. I was so over working 60, 70 hours a week, campaigning, then running positive change on the side. And whilst I didn't want to let it go, and I didn't want to have those 7 years, as I saw, wasted if we were to fold the organization, I just felt like I didn't have the energy or capacity to keep going. At that point, I was working in landscaping 2 days a week, painting or doing all sorts of odd jobs like mowing grass, planting trees, painting houses. And then the other 3 days I was working for Positive Change. So I'd actually given away my role. I think I quit my campaigning job at the Australian Conservation Foundation in 2018 because we finally had enough funding to pay me part-time. But still, we couldn't get to that full-time role that I wanted and that the organisation needed. We had one other paid staff member in Australia, Amy, who was our fundraising and development manager. She was also working 3 days a week. And I just felt like we'd never get to the point where we could adequately resource the organisation, and I was over the stress. Kinship really offered a lifeline, and one of my good friends and mentors, Kelvin Davies, who founded Rainforest Rescue, quite a large organisation in Australia, sent me the link to Kinship. I ended up forgetting about it or putting it aside, and then I think Facebook was creeping me because I saw an ad in my Facebook feed for Kinship, and ended up clicking on it and applying, and getting through, as Nigel tells me, as the wild card. There was 50-50. Some people wanted me on the cohort, others weren't sure in having a founder of a small NGO joining. Maybe it was also high risk, but I'm thankful that I got through, and it's really changed my perspective, and it gave me at that time the networks that I didn't have and the support that I didn't have to realize that I wasn't alone, and that there were a lot of people out there facing similar challenges. But I also learnt so much when I went to Kinship. I really didn't know much at all about market-based solutions or market-based tools. And since Kinship, we've now developed market-based tools into all of our programs. We've developed for-profit social enterprises, which are supporting our communities. And we're really looking at how the company arms of Positive Change in Australia, India, and the Solomon Islands, where we're set up as companies as well, can overtake the NGO. And again, in hindsight, I think if I knew all of this prior to starting a nonprofit, I probably would have started us out as a company and really had, if at all, the nonprofit as a smaller arm, because I've found over many years of working for nonprofits now that the model just is becoming more and more unsustainable, more and more competitive, and we really need to be driving economic outcomes within this system that we have. I mean, my crazy dream is still for us to completely overtake capitalism, and I wouldn't say that in many presentation settings, and redesign the system, because I don't think it's working. I don't think a system where we have, people who are earning absurd amounts of money, as much as, I mean, in America, I think it's as much as half of the population, three men earn more than half of the American population, which is absurd. And in which we have this dire inequity and environmental, social, all of it. I think we need to change the system so that it's more equitable, but we aren't there yet. And so I think we need to play into that same system if we're really going to drive outcomes to address those challenges. And so that's what we've come to the realization of post Kinship, is if you can't beat them, join them. And at least right now, we're developing those systems that can drive a profit, that can ensure long-term sustainability, and don't have to rely on donations that are so, and increasingly so in the current economic climate, difficult to obtain. Also, since Kinship, we've launched 2 new programs that focus on biodiversity outcomes, nature-based solutions, and offsets. And we've also developed programs in a new country as of 2021, which is the Solomon Islands. And I'd like to show a little video now, which we just released earlier this year as well, on one of our social enterprise models. And this program started in India during lockdown with Krishna, who was our waste management coordinator, is now our waste to wealth program manager, and has also been a part of Kinship. He was one of the selected members for the regional summit in India a few years ago, which I was really thankful to participate in as well. And I'm so proud of Krishna. He's come so far from very humble beginnings, from selling lights on the street as a child to foreigners at bars until 3 or 4 in the morning, to managing to get a degree, which is a huge achievement for someone from small scale fisheries communities in India, to now working for us, developing a social enterprise model, developing all of our waste to wealth programs. And just recently we were funded by USAID's Pacific America Fund in the Solomon Islands, and Krishna's going to be coming to Australia this weekend actually, and spending some time with myself and the team, and then traveling with me to the Solomon Islands next week to implement the black soldier fly larvae organic composting program that he developed in India in the Solomon Islands through USAID funding. So those sorts of success stories really make me so proud of our team, our approach, and the work that we're doing, which is changing the game in terms of conservation and social outcomes, even if it's on a small scale. So this is a short video on that composting program, which we're now taking across to the Solomon Islands.
കൊറോണ സമയത്ത് ഞാൻ ശരിക്കും എന്തുവാ ആഴ്ചയിൽ 2 ദിവസമൊക്കെ ചെയ്ത് ടെസ്റ്റ് ചെയ്ത് പഠിക്കുകയായിരുന്നു. പക്ഷെ എനിക്കൊരു പേടിയായിരുന്നു, കാരണം നമ്മൾ എങ്ങനെ ഡെയിലി മാനേജ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റും. ഇപ്പൊ ഞാൻ ചെയ്തിരിക്കുന്ന പ്രോസസ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ 25 കിലോ ഡെയിലി മാനേജ് ചെയ്യാൻ പറ്റുന്നുള്ള ഒരു പ്രോട്ടോടൈപ്പ് ആണ്. ശരിക്കും അത് നമ്മൾ എക്സ്പാൻഡ് ചെയ്യുന്ന അനുസരിച്ച് വേണമെങ്കിൽ നമുക്ക് കിലോകൾ കൂട്ടാം. 25, 50, 100, 1000 എങ്ങനെ വേണമെങ്കിലും കൊണ്ട് എത്തിക്കാൻ പറ്റും. പക്ഷെ 7 ദിവസം എന്നുള്ള രീതിയിൽ അത് കമ്പോസ്റ്റ് ആയി കിട്ടും.
For a restaurant, it's very obvious. If we keep our waste even for 2 days, the worms and all that trouble will start. We have to get rid of that waste immediately. And this has definitely helped us.
ഒരു ബ്ലാക്ക് സോൾജർ ലാർവ എന്നൊരു ഫ്ലൈ ഉണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ അത് ശരിക്കും ഫുഡ് വേസ്റ്റ് അട്രാക്ട് ചെയ്യും. അതായത് സ്മെല്ല് ഉണ്ടെങ്കിൽ ഫീമെയിൽ വന്ന് അതിനെ അട്രാക്ട് ചെയ്യും. അപ്പോൾ ആ ഫ്ലൈ ബേസ് ചെയ്തിട്ട് ഞാൻ എന്ത് ചെയ്തു, എൻ്റെ വീട്ടിൽ തന്നെ 2 ബക്കറ്റ് വേസ്റ്റ് കൊണ്ടുവന്ന് ഞാൻ തന്നെ അതിൽ തുടക്കം തൊട്ടേ ഞാൻ പഠിക്കുകയാണ്.
Definitely, by disposing of our waste to somebody who is reusing it, making it like something like composite, which we are using it again, it's very helpful for fertilization.
നമ്മൾ പാക്കിംഗ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ഓൾട്ടർനേറ്റീവ് ആണ്, പ്യൂർ ജ്യൂട്ട് ആണ്. ഇത് ഏകദേശം ഒരു 3 മാസം എടുത്തു എനിക്ക് ഈ ഒരു ഫാബ്രിക് ഇവിടെ കിട്ടാൻ. കാരണം എല്ലാവരും ഇവിടെ ഞാൻ മിക്ക സ്ഥലത്ത് റിസർച്ച് ചെയ്തപ്പോൾ ഒന്നെങ്കിൽ അത് കോട്ടൺ മിക്സ് ആയിരിക്കും, പോളിസ്റ്റർ മിക്സ് ആയിരിക്കും, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അകത്തൊരു പ്ലാസ്റ്റിക് റാപ്പർ ആയിരിക്കും. ഈ പാക്കിങ്ങിന്റെ പ്രത്യേകത എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ എന്തായാലും ഇത് പ്ലാസ്റ്റിക്കിന്റെ ഒരു റിമൂവൽ ആണ്. ബ്ലാക്ക് സോൾജർ ലാർവയുടെ വേറൊരു ഗുണം എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അത് വേസ്റ്റിനെ നല്ല രീതിയിൽ കുറയ്ക്കും. നമ്മളിപ്പോ 10-20 കിലോ ആണ് വെക്കണമെങ്കിൽ, ഇപ്പൊ 20 കിലോ ആണെങ്കിൽ അത് എങ്ങനെ പോലും ഒരു 8 കിലോയിലോട്ട് എത്തിക്കും. പിന്നെ ലാർവയുടെ വേറൊരു ബെനിഫിറ്റ് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ നമുക്ക് ഫെർട്ടിലൈസർ, അതായത് 100% ഓർഗാനിക് ആണ്. നമ്മൾ വേറൊരു കെമിക്കലോ വേറെ ഒന്നും നമ്മൾ അതിൻ്റെ അകത്ത് ആഡ് ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പൊ ആ ഒരു ബെനിഫിറ്റ് ഉണ്ട്. പിന്നെ വേറൊരു ബെനിഫിറ്റ് ലാർവ എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ നമുക്ക് ലാർവ ചിക്കൻ ഫീഡായിട്ട് യൂസ് ചെയ്യാം, ഫിഷ് ഫീഡായിട്ട് യൂസ് ചെയ്യാം. അപ്പോൾ ഇത്രയും ഒരു ബെനിഫിറ്റ് ഉള്ള ഒരു കമ്പോസ്റ്റ് ആകുമ്പോൾ നമുക്ക് എന്തായാലും കമ്മ്യൂണിറ്റിക്ക് നല്ലൊരു രീതിയിൽ വരുമാനം ഫ്യൂച്ചറിൽ കൊണ്ടുവരാൻ പറ്റും.
So the black soldier fly larvae composting program really addresses a need in our communities where organic waste is creating enormous issues in terms of disease and human health, but also nutrifying waterways and coastal ecosystems. Some organic waste is also burned, which creates air quality issues. So the black soldier fly larvae approach that Krishna's come up with is a really exciting approach. And we are currently running the program in India with a 30% profit margin. Krishna mentioned in the video, which was put together last year, filmed last year, and then released earlier this year, that we're managing about 25 kilos a day. That's now 80 kilos a day. And we've just developed a business case study to build a waste recovery centre and purchase land. We're looking to purchase about 500 square metres of land. Build that centre entirely from the waste we've collected from our communities through the bricks that we're producing through our plastic shredding and extrusion machines. We've costed it all out. We've got a few interested funders in India. And then once we do that, we've realized that we can scale up within the first 3 months to a ton a day. And with a 30% profit margin, that provides income opportunities for about 200 women full time. So it's a really exciting model. And obviously there's no shortage of organic waste, especially in coastal communities where there's no management structures in place, and very, very excited to take that to the Solomons next week with Krishna, who'll be spending a month there and developing it across 4 islands and communities, including Gizo, which is the second most densely populated area after Honiara, the capital, where our Marine Conservation Centre is in the Solomon Islands. So in 2019, going back to how Kinship has really helped myself and Positive Change for Marine Life, we had an outdated strategic plan. We had no fundraising or comms strategy. We had 5 paid staff across Australia and India, core staff. There were 2 of us part-time in Australia and 3 full-time in India. We had 20 casual women employed in India running our waste programs, probably working 1 or 2 days a week each. And we brought in $121,000 in revenue in 2019, the Kinship year. And I was ready to just jump ship. I'd had enough. In 2024, moving forward, we've got a new strategic plan, which has been in operation since 2022 and going really well. We've cut a lot of the fat, so to speak, and focused on our 3 programs: Waste to Wealth, Rewilding Our Floodplains, and Fishing for Change, which will continue to drive moving forward and gives us a lot more clarity. We have a marketing and communication strategy that was developed by an external consultant, and we're implementing across all of our engagement channels. We've got 14 paid staff, all full-time across Australia, India, and the Solomon Islands. And we have now 120 women and youth employed across Australia, India, and the Solomon Islands, part-time, running our programs. That's now going to increase with this USAID funding to 146. We're employing an additional 26 women and youth in the Solomon Islands through the program over the next 18 months. And we're bringing in, although still small, especially by US standards, we're bringing in about $1 million a year in revenue. And I'm really confident that in the next 12 to 24 months, we can expand that to our target, which is 3 to 5 million a year, but also start to drive income through those growing social enterprise models that we are developing. So 5 years, big turnaround, very exciting. And as I said, Kinship has really been a huge catalyst and something that I'm so thankful for. Feel very privileged to have been selected for and to have developed such an incredible community of great friends as well as colleagues that now myself and our teams work with on various programs around the world. So a diverse funding mix is what I'd like to speak to next. In a world of instant media, something that I notice a lot of organizations don't do well is storytelling. And I think storytelling is really your friend, no matter what you're doing. Take a camera with you wherever you go. A good camera, capture content, capture stories, engage film and photography experts and storytellers in your funding proposals. It's really important to tell good stories that are visually and compelling. And I think a lot of us, especially in the conservation science sector, are pretty bad at this. So I think something that's really helped us is that branding, that storytelling, and really engaging people on an emotional level in the work that we do as well. Funders' requirements. So funders ask for a lot, and it shits me no end, and I'm sorry to use the language, but when I look at some of these grants that are meant to be designed for local communities, and you know, they're promoting, oh, it's grassroots, we want local people involved, we want marginalized groups and diverse voices to be leading this work. And then they want you to submit 400 policy documents and OH&S policies and gender equity and social inclusion documents. And for us, like in the Solomon Islands, when we look at some of the grants that we've applied for, won and lost, we talk to the funders and say, hey, are you guys for real? You really think in a country where I think 60% of people don't have access to electricity and maybe 30% of people have used the internet at least one day in a year, you really think people are going to be able to do all of this work? It's insane. So something that's incredibly frustrating is funding requirements being so onerous, but being so resource intensive and really just not fitting the real solutions that we should be driving in communities and giving those communities ownership and empowering them that they can make a difference. And that's something that I'm not afraid to talk to funders about. And I think they all realize it as well. I understand the complexities and the fact that they need to tick certain boxes, but I think we need a lot of change in that area. But something to be aware of is implementing that in your strategies. You're all professionals in this room and online, so you have extensive background in this regard, but making sure that storytelling, culture, gender equity and social inclusion, monitoring and evaluation, alignment to regional, national and international policies, having a proven track record of success and strong transparency in terms of audited financials, solid methodologies on impact, gathering data, all of these things are really important. And I think if you're aware of these specific elements and you're incorporating them, even in a small way into your project design, you'll be a lot more successful when looking for funds, no matter where they are, if it's a government grant or it's a corporate CSR fund. Vital program elements. So culture and GESI are really important, but they also create a better world. And a lot of what we were doing before I'd even heard of the acronym GESI and knew what it was, we were already doing it. We were already looking at gender equality and engaging with marginalized and diverse voices, disabled people, youth in countries where there's high youth unemployment, and social challenges around youth. So really, really important to look at culture and GESI in the work that you're doing as well and integrate that, because it's a good thing to do, but also because it's become growingly important for funders. Policies on slavery, OH&S, etc. There's so many policies, and when we first started out up to 2019, I think we had maybe 3 or 4 internal policies that we barely ever looked at, and didn't, most of the stuff probably didn't even know they existed. Now in 2024, in the last 5 years, I think we have about 48 policies, and although I'm sure a lot of them will just be collecting dust online. They create a stockpile of what funders are looking for, and they're actually incredibly helpful for us. So ensuring that your data and systems are well designed from the get-go and that they're growing with you, no matter how onerous that is a really great and important step to take. I've worked for some very big NGOs that have not designed their systems well, and their systems are still where they were 20 years ago. The amount of work that they need to do now for where they are as organizations has been unbelievable, like literally millions of dollars spent to redesign those systems. So having systems that grow with you, really important. And the more policies that you have, as onerous as they are, the more clear that it is to your staff, the better trained. And this is all a no-brainer, I'm sure, but it just leads to much easier applications and an ability to do more and provide more relevance and value to funders. So now we're at a stage that we have very well-designed systems. We've got a great database online. And if we're applying for funds, we can do it a lot better and a lot more effectively because we can draw upon all of that experience of the other funds, the other policies that we've had to design, etc., and mix and match for each specific opportunity. The final one is monitor. I think data, as you are all no doubt aware, is so important. Ensuring that your research is rigorous and that your data collection is embedded into everything you do, whether it's monitoring biodiversity, waste flows, the impact of gender equity in your programs or social inclusion indicators. Data is vital, and it'll really build trust in the value of your work whilst also providing impact. The other thing to talk about on that is ensure that your methodologies align with the approach of NRM groups and government. This is something that we've been developing and still are refining now to ensure that our methodologies align, because you want to be the go-to for contracts and knowledge. You want governments to know who you are and know that it's easy. They can just engage with positive change for marine life. The methodology is going to fit their standard regionally or nationally, and they know that there's not going to be headaches for them when they're looking at your data or funding you for a contract. Having a random method that doesn't align to other stakeholders in your space can severely limit opportunities. And that doesn't mean that every methodology needs to align, but for us, doing work on rivers, for example, having that strong methodology and developing it over time to reflect the methods that state and federal government are using on other in other catchments has really helped us immensely. Finally, with monitoring, making sure that you're aligning with priorities as per policies and global frameworks, like the Global Biodiversity Framework targets, 30 by 30, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, national policy priorities like the Solomon Islands 2020 waste strategy we use for waste to wealth. Again, probably a no-brainer, but I think just being mindful of that and incorporating it into your approach will really help you when you're seeking funds and trying to secure them. Something that we've really benefited from is having great interns. We always have interns on board, generally for 3 months or longer. At the moment, I think we've got 5 interns working across our 3 countries, and getting them to undertake literature reviews to explore policy alignment to programs is also very, very helpful, and we'll do a lot of that work for you and give them a great experience as well that they can use in their future careers. Next up, I wanted to show a short film which for me reflects good storytelling. We had a professional filmmaker do this from down in Melbourne, and this program operates near Byron Bay in Australia, which has become a bit of a hub for startups, tech companies, fashion labels, and Hollywood celebrities. It's a bit of it's a very interesting dynamic in that area, but a great place for funding. And so that storytelling is really vital to connect those people who have a lot of networks and access to resources to our programs. So I'll go into this short film on our Rewilding Our Floodplains program and some of the people who we work with in the Byron Shire in Australia.
And this river sustains this really important complex web of life. For our people, we grow up with those principles of looking after country. And when we talk about country, we mean land, the ocean, and our waterways.
It's a really finite resource. It's something that we need to protect and preserve and give back to. Otherwise, we could lose it. And we're seeing that with rivers all around the country. Murray-Darling, it's really a river that's on the brink of no return. And that's what we're trying to stop from happening in areas like northern New South Wales and the Brunswick River.
As a kid, I was just on the back of the fishing boat, pretty much fished my whole life, always had a fishing rod, always try to take it wherever I go. It's getting to those sort of days where you're thinking about, you know, how much longer are we going to have fish for? And
what we need to do is, you know, everybody to come on board, to join those links all the way down the river, because the water connects us. We want to see a positive plan develop for the future of the Brunswick River.
Everyone comes together and says this is something that's worth doing. If people are able to prioritize restoration, making it a true collective community action is how you can help overcome that daunting sense of enormity. Because when you fight together as a community, anything's possible.
We all live here. We all want to belong. We call it home. So why would we not want to look after it together?
that was a promo for the launch of our Healthy Rivers Fund, which ended up leading to what's now our Rewilding Our Floodplains program. And we raised about $50,000 at the beginning just through community donations for that fund, and continuing it now with the community and also corporate partners and grantors that are contributing to our vision for landscape scale biodiversity corridors across 2 high biodiversity catchments in New South Wales and Queensland. Gladys, I realise we're at an hour. How are people there? I can't see anyone. Are they falling asleep, or are people happy for me to continue for another 5 to 10 minutes?
How we doing? I think everyone's still okay, 5-10 minutes more, yeah, but we'd like some questions, I'm sure, so.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll race through this. We're almost there. I think I've got 2 main slides left, and then we can speed to questions. So going on with the diverse funding mix, I think asking yourself what your strengths are. Do you have a proven track record that would enable you to pitch and be successful in securing major government grants and multinational funds? Is your work better suited to corporate funders and alignment to CSR priorities? Or would a local government or community-centered funding approach serve you better? And I know, again, you all know this, it's simple questions, but just revisiting it and putting it into context and working through it has really helped myself and our organization in developing those funding mechanisms that sustain our work and continue our growth. A pipeline is really crucial, and I can't emphasize this enough how important Asana has been to our organization. Using Asana has really changed the game over the last 5 years for positive change. And we run all of our programs, all of our tasks, all of our Gantt charts, our pipelines, they're all in Asana, and our teams work collaboratively across the 3 countries and our multiple projects on Asana. It's just a fantastic team tool and worth investing in. LinkedIn Sales Navigator, I just signed up, and our partnerships manager just signed up for that earlier this year, and it's unbelievable connecting with people that you'd otherwise have no access to, and it's resulted for us in quite a lot of funding coming in and meetings, and we're pitching to Tiffany in New York in 2 weeks as an example. Would have no access to them at all, but LinkedIn Sales Nav enabled us to have that conversation. So developing really solid pitches that engage with that company or that grantor or that person you're trying to reach out to, LinkedIn Sales Nav is fantastic. Conferences are also a great way to connect one-to-one with major funders. I rarely spend time at international conferences in sessions. I develop connections prior, usually on LinkedIn or via email, look at the people who are going to be there. And most of my time at COP in Montreal, at COP 16 that I'll be going to later this year, I'll be spending sitting down, having lunch, trying to get wealthy people to give us money, basically. And if your focus in your organization is to raise funds, those international conferences are really worthwhile. And, you know, I love the science-focused conferences, but for me, it just doesn't have an ROI for us anymore. So we really focus on the big global UN conferences where a lot of those funders are going to be. And mix it up, mix up all those approaches and have a healthy balance, and make sure that you're not getting too tied to one funding source. Again, as you probably all know, you know, grants can be very unpredictable. So having that healthy balance of funding will ensure sustainability long term. And just the final slide, I think about this often and had never heard about the planning in reverse approach until I worked for the Australian Conservation Foundation. And now everything we do this way. So planning in reverse can be a great way to navigate a lot of the challenges that I've spoken about, and those challenges that, you know, I faced when building positive change for marine life, starting at the top and working down. So what's your overall objective first, and then working backwards to what are those key milestones, and developing a reverse action plan are really vital and can give you that bigger context so that you're not making it up as you go. You know exactly where you need to be headed, what you want to achieve. And then once those 3 top areas are developed, you can develop the people and resources and the support networks and funds that can help you to get there. But for us, having made it up as we went along for many years, if I knew this back then, I think it really would have changed the game and enabled us to grow a lot quicker. Some recent partnership Some recent funding partnerships that we've had that have been quite instrumental in our growth is, as I mentioned, the USAID Pacific America Fund, which we received in May, and we're now implementing a $1 million program over the next year and a half in the Solomon Islands, which will really expand our work there. The Ubuntu Foundation has been an ongoing source of funding for us, and that's that lady there, Carolyn Vincent, who's a private philanthropist who's made a lot of money through the stock market and selling her company. Over the last, I met her at a market in Brisbane 4 years ago when Positive Change was still just post Kinship, actually, when we were still, oh no, it was before Kinship. 2018, I met her, and she was the first donor who enabled me to work part-time and to fund our partnerships manager. Then post Kinship, on a phone call with her, she'd committed $150,000 over 3 years, and she was a little bit naive as to how much we needed to achieve that long-term growth through operational funds. And she said, so that 150 should get you to the level where you'll be self-sustainable, right? And I said, well, Carolyn, really, like, we need a lot more than that if we're going to bring the staff on and build the relationships over time that can enable us to really grow. And she said, how much do you need? On a phone call on my balcony here where I get 1 bar of reception on our farm. And I said, we really need, $2 million. And she said, done. 3 weeks later, she donated $2 million to the organization. And I met her at a market, at an organic fruit and vegetable market at 6:30 in the morning on a Sunday. So you never know where those funders are, but just not being afraid to ask. If I'd never asked her that, we never would have received that donation. And now to date in 2024, through land and funds, her foundation has donated over $4.5 million to Positive Change, which is enormous, and has really been a catalyst for the work we do. And recently we partnered with Intrepid Travel in India, and we run about 60 Intrepid groups to India now as well, which is a really consistent source of funding for our India programs. Here are some of the impacts. You can also see them on our website, but as we continue to grow, we're having more and more impact, and we really monitor that impact and have impact level, just a simple Google sheet with an explainer and a methodology which our teams are updating at the end of every month so that we can continue to track that impact across all of our programs. I was going to talk a little bit about our Rewilding Our Floodplains program, but I don't think we have much time left. These are some of the properties, though, since Kinship with the new rewilding program that you saw in the video for the Healthy Rivers Fund. We've purchased these through a private foundation, and we have full access. And although we're not the owners of the properties, they were purchased for us to develop these landscape scale rewilding approaches, which we're running across the northern New South Wales catchment on the Brunswick River and here to connect to high biodiversity value national parks to an incredibly important river, which is the southernmost catchment of the Great Barrier Reef as well. So in total, we've secured about 220 acres of land, and we are rewilding through a multifaceted approach, and carbon biodiversity offsets are a core part of that as well. And these are the sites in Queensland, just from a satellite view, and the goal is to connect these two properties to this national park here, and now we're working with landowners to strategically build corridors all the way along to that western left-hand side national park as well. So we'll have a full landscape corridor across this valley in a very high biodiversity value area. A few of our achievements: we were selected by the United Nations as one of the world's top 20 waste to wealth programs from over the 230 international projects. Our Marine Conservation Centre in India, we're now building one in the Solomons through USAID, which should be ready by the time myself and Krishna get there next week. And you're all welcome to come and visit. We do a lot of programs, bring on a lot of interns, and do impact adventures. So would love to connect with some fellows in our program locations in India and the Solomons or Australia. Don't have time for that video. And just some pictures from our teams on the ground, running our programs with the community in our Marine Conservation Centre. Yeah, I think I'm almost there. There is a lot of photos here. And finally, I'll just wrap up with Kinship again. Actually, 1 2-minute video. this is the launch of our Fishing for Change program in the Solomon Islands, and we've just recently secured this whole island from the owner where we all stay, which has the second highest coral reef biodiversity in the world, second only to Raja Ampat. He's come on board and fully agreed to sign contracts to say that he will protect this area and work with us and the regional government to create, hopefully, the Solomons' first fully functioning locally managed marine area. The Solomons has one of the largest marine estates in the world, with only 1.5 kilometers of it formally protected. Reaching 30 by 30 is absurd. I think it's less than 0.00001% that's currently protected. But through this locally managed marine area approach, we're working with 2 universities in Australia on it. Hopefully we can protect these incredible coral reefs before they're gone. So I'll just show you this video quickly before we wrap up.
We got no volume on this, Carl.
No volume. Mine's working at my end.
I think it's bad signal sending it through the internet. Doesn't work.
Is the volume working?
It's working, but we're not getting it's broken, as it were, broken.
Yeah, but YouTube link.
Yeah, maybe the best thing, Carl, send us the YouTube links for all these videos and we can look at them later, because it's just not happening for us.
No worries. And just a quick before and after, which I think really speaks to the impact that our communities have had. In 2017, when we first visited our Now Project sites in India, this was what the community looked like. It was all an informal waste dump. In 2023, last year, when I was in India, I took these photos of the same site, which really almost brought me to tears to see the impact that our community had had. These are all now sports fields, which the kids play on every day. They play cricket and football. There's barely any waste. I mean, comparative to what it was before, it's unbelievable. And the women are now growing organic fruit and vegetables from the organic compost that we're producing. So I think if you can do this in a place like India, you can do it anywhere in the world. And it really gives me hope that these community-led approaches are what's needed all over to create change for nature and for the communities that rely on it for survival. So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Kinship. These are some of the many pics of Kinship adventures since 2019 and during 2019, and really so happy to have been a part of the program and to continue to be a part of the program and connect with you all, so that we can hopefully address a lot of these challenges together and grow together towards a better world. Thanks.
Top left is yesterday, bit in the middle is tomorrow. Bottom middle is tomorrow. And then that's graduation to the right. Thanks, Carl. We got a few more minutes for questions, comments. Anything, guys? Shout out what you want to ask Carl.
Carl, you can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll still come close. I feel like there's this heavy expectation that everyone's expecting me to be the one to talk to you. My name is Crystal Ambrose, Dr. Crystal Ambrose. I'm from the Bahamas. And I think you and I are kindred spirits. I'm the Atlantic version of you. I run a nonprofit organization called Bahamas Plastic Movement, and I'll share just a little story about my acceptance into Kinship as well. And I'll put Nigel on the spot here. I also was 50-50 because they were trying to decide, I'm still this one person running a nonprofit. Is it a good fit? And Nigel is like, you should look at Karl Goodsell. He did this thing. And I remember asking Nigel, I was like, did he did it before or after Kinship? He was like, after. I was like, exactly. That's why I need to be a part of Kinship. How am I supposed to learn this stuff?
Okay, good answer.
But my comment to you is I'm trying to move my organization to the same level where you are. Right now, our mission is raising awareness and finding solutions to plastic pollution. We've been in functioning for the last decade. And now I want to pivot and basically do the same waste to wealth program that you're running. And not only just plastic, but also the same composting that you're doing, looking at food and organic waste, so much so that we've even incorporated that into our program. 2 summers ago, we looked at black fly larvae and looking at if they can actually decompose styrofoam and looking at composting. So I don't have a question for you now, but I just want to say, you and I, we need to talk. We'll be in touch. I know you have 45,000 emails, and I know the exact same thing. Everyone's bombarding you for information and they want to talk, and it takes a lot of time, but I hope you can make some time for me. And I would love to just sit and chat with you to figure out how I can take my organization to the next level to really shift livelihoods and also address this waste issue that we face in the Bahamas and also other small islands within our region. I also hope to come visit you one day. I just throwing it out there, you know, shooting my shot in that arena. Yeah, so I hope we can stay in touch. And please look up our organization. It's BahamasPlasticMovement.org. We're on YouTube, so you can see some of the things that we've done as well around zero waste, around citizen science. I have some publications as well on how plastic moves over space and time on our islands. And my next step is how do I use that data to now drive beach cleanups and then divert that plastic into functional products that we can take to market to benefit the lives of local youth and local community members in and around the Bahamas. Yeah, so remember my name, Crystal Ocean. All right, we'll be in touch. Thank you. And congratulations on the great work.
Thanks. That sounds awesome. And what we're really trying to develop as well, Crystal, is a open source platform. So a lot of the programs that I spoke about for Waste to Wealth, we're developing the tools and methodologies so that they can be open source. So my goal for the organization is as we move forward, we can take this to other countries and other locations and be a consultant or a supporting mechanism rather than the implementers and the ongoing drivers of these programs. So definitely happy to share all of our methodologies and approach. And at the end of the day, if our work is made redundant in Waste to Wealth, I would be stoked, because waste is not, well, it never was my passion, but we kind of fell into it because of the need. And there's so much other work to do in terms of marine protected areas and fisheries and rewilding. So we're hoping that we can develop a mechanism to really support programs like yours and other communities to share together and learn together to drive those outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So thank you. Yeah, let's stay in touch. Maybe we'll see you at a regional workshop if we can get this funding. Hey, Nigel.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I have a comment, maybe. This is Lula from Argentina. You say something at the beginning that says, start small. And I was just thinking about how we started. I was doing some science in a wild place in Argentina, and I came up with an idea of creating a national park. So I was trying to start small, you know. The thing is that the community had been fighting mining companies for 20 years almost. So how hard it is, even when we try to start small, but the issues are already super complex. The situations are already super complex. So I was trying to come back to that time when I was initiating my NGO. Yeah, I just wanted to see what you think about that and why you're saying maybe start small when the issues that we're facing are already super complex. Politicians, issues with the community, it's really hard, right? So I just